Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet presented by OTGBasketball.com. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Corey Waldron. How are we feeling today, Corey?
Feeling good, feeling blessed. St. Patty's Day was everything and more. Hung out in New York City for the day. Alive and kicking the next day, which is a beautiful thing. So I'm happy to be back on the OTG podcast.
Happy to have Corey at 100%. He recovered fully from yesterday. Plenty to talk about. Just a reminder, you can listen to the Outlet on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and like we mentioned, we are now airing on Dash Radio. So check us out. Let us know what you think. So we're going to start off today with LeBron, who posted a picture on Instagram of himself dunking on Jusuf Nurkic, maybe one of the best dunks of the season. But this was after a loss, and a loss which LeBron had missed a layup late in the game, which could have helped the Cavs win. So what are your thoughts on this? Does it even matter? Why are people making such a big deal about it? I
have already tweeted about this because I thought this entire situation was it's annoying to me. I'm okay with posting your own highlights and getting hyped because obviously the dunk was ferocious. And, he had the dunk against the Suns last week where he pretty much did the same exact dunk against the Suns when he was in the Miami jersey. So, it's cool when LeBron's, hyping himself up and everything. I don't like it, though, when you're not winning basketball. It feels like there's too much of a focus. And I get it. The Cavs aren't that good this year. So, LeBron, I'm guessing, just has to find enjoyment and love of the game through his own personal achievements. Because, as we know, he's one of the top, NBA players of all time, top three, arguably the best. But I have a problem with because to me, there's no difference between LeBron doing a dunk and tweeting about it in a loss compared to Kobe ball hogging and going for 50 in a loss. You know what I'm saying? There's certain things to me that they're similar. I don't. If you're not winning, just don't post. To me, that's the basis of all this.
I kind of agree. I think the fact they lost, it comes off as a sour note, especially because he missed that late layup. If LeBron played lights out and they had lost on a Dame Lillard buzzer beater, it's okay. It's not as big a deal. So, but maybe it's LeBron in a business perspective trying to keep himself in the spotlight with all the attention. Obviously, you mentioned the Cavs aren't as good as they've been the last few seasons, and the NBA's been talking about a lot of other teams, especially in the Western Conference. Maybe it's him trying to attract more spotlight for his brand. You think that's a possibility?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, it's King James, right? So it is quite possible that, he's still prepping himself for life outside of basketball. He's prepping himself as being the king still. The year 15 has been the hashtag he's used almost on every post this year. He's obviously having a type of career year. I'm not going to say it's his best year, but he's having one of his best years in the later parts of his career, which we don't normally see from guys, especially guys like LeBron who have been to the finals for 7 straight years, have those extra miles, those extra games, the strain his body has put on. He's never been hurt. So, yes, it's okay to, hype yourself up to a degree because what he's still doing to for the most part is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact he's doing it at 33, you mentioned the dunk against the Suns and then that dunk against Nurkic, which maybe was the dunk of the season. Would you put that as the dunk of the season or just in the top 5?
It's got to be. It's top 5. I would even say it's top 3. I'm not sure if it's the best. I would have to look at all the dunks, but it will definitely be in the conversation for best dunk of the year when everything's said and done.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that LeBron got so high on that dunk was crazy. We've seen him throw down some monster, powerful dunks, but he took off and he got so high at the age of 33. It's just he's got plenty of juice in the.
And it's funny because we've seen LeBron botch dunks in the last couple of years, and that dunk in particular just shows he may not elevate perfectly at times, but there is still a lot of juice left in those legs.
I think, it's kind of like a reminder, I'm still feeling pretty nice because like you've mentioned, I want to say maybe in the beginning of his time back in Cleveland, his athleticism didn't look as, great as in Miami, but it could have been some of that back injury that he had a little bit of. But right now, he just looks so athletic. At that age, we haven't really seen players being able to keep their athleticism this long.
I mean, Kobe, for example, yes, I know Kobe had some nice dunks in the latter part of his career, but I mean, his athleticism took a major fall. Obviously, he had an Achilles injury that changes a lot of things, but even before that, he wasn't getting up as ferociously as he did early on in his career, and he had just as many miles as LeBron.
Yeah, he was getting more of those like sneak dunks or one once in a while type of thing where like he wasn't really getting up. It was more of like a clever put down. But talking about the second best player in the NBA, Kevin Durant, Warriors announced, this previous week that he'll be out at least 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks he'll get reevaluated for a rib injury, which is dealt with the cartilage in there. It's kind of complicated, but it does seem like something, if it really did matter, KD would be playing. What are your thoughts on this injury for the Warriors and Durant?
It's funny to me. I mean, this is obviously it's not a big deal yet. We'll have to see, how he comes back and everything. But it pretty much locked up the 1 seed officially for the Rockets. I don't think there's any way now that the Golden State Warriors can catch the Rockets. But it's we made mention to this on the preview series that this was the Warriors' title year unless injuries happened. Well, their big three. If Draymond's in the big three or whatnot, it's up to your call. But their big three has been riddled with injuries now this last month. Obviously, Curry's rehabbing from the ankle injury. He should be back soon. Clay's got the fractured bone in his thumb, and then Durant's got the rib injury. So it's a little worrisome that they're breaking down at this part of the season when you're nearing the playoff run. Like, this is when you don't want to get hurt. This is when you want to get healthy. So that's one issue for the Warriors. But as long as Curry is back by playoff time and, Durant's 2 weeks, so as long as he's back, they should be okay. But it's definitely concerning, and it brings up, like a yellow flag to, caution things a little bit.
Yeah, definitely concerning when, three of your maybe top 4 players or top 3 players, like you said, your call if you want to say, Clay or Draymond. But Clay and Curry are going to get probably reevaluated this week. KD probably around the 31st based off the Warriors saying 2 weeks. Now, do you think this is the Warriors, like, these guys really need to take this time off, or they're just being smart and kind of getting prepped for that postseason run? Like, like I mentioned, I think Steph and I think KD, if it was the finals, would be playing right now. But due to the fact it's a regular season and they don't seem super concerned about that 1 seed, do you think they're just taking the smart route?
I want to say it's probably a bit of both, right? I'm not going to say these guys are definitely banged up and everything else, and no different than what the Spurs have done in the history by keeping those guys as fresh as they can for the playoffs. If you're a little bit banged up coming into April, you're going to want to ease these guys back to get them as healthy as possible. Because, as we know, for at least the teams that are in the top of the conferences, like the Rockets, the Raptors even, and the Celtics to a degree, and the Warriors, you don't want to lose any of your stars. So if you're a little banged up going into these final 3-4 weeks of the season, don't push them. Don't overextend them. Don't make them play 40 minutes a game. If you can give guys some time off and you can let them rest, heal those nagging little injuries that almost every player and every team has at this stage of the year, then yeah, do it. I'm perfectly okay. I'm sure that there are, they're trying to get these guys as rested as possible, especially with the Warriors, who we saw going into the All-Star break. They were a little bit, they look a little tired, fatigued. And then after the All-Star break, they looked good until the injuries happened. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is them really just trying to get everybody healthy and up to par for the playoffs.
Yeah, and it could actually benefit them in the sense there's been a lot of talk about their bench not being as good this season. Getting more minutes, taking more shots, getting more touches is going to help these guys get some rhythm going in the postseason. They could really need one of them to step up if one of these injuries do linger or something like that. So I think there could be some positives. And from a Warriors perspective, do you think they really care that much about the 1 seed?
No. No. They've already done everything. And when it comes to the regular season, they had the giant win streak. They had the 2 titles now. The regular season to them means nothing. They've already, you know what I'm saying? Like, it may have mattered early on in this dynasty, the regular season. But at this point, once you've already won 1 or 2 titles, the regular season means nothing. It's all about now winning the championship again. So I don't think they really care at all about being a 1 or 2 seed. As long as they have home court for the first 2 rounds, that's all the Warriors want.
Yeah, and it's not like the Warriors don't play well on the road. Probably one of the best road records in the league at 26-9. But what would you say, before we move on from the Warriors, rank the injuries from most concerning to least concerning, regarding Steph, Clay, and Curry? I mean,
most
Steph
concerning,
Steph, KD, and Curry.
Yeah, I was about to say there's only 2, but yeah, I think the worst injury by far is got to be Clay, because it's the thumb, it's a fracture. There's no guarantee on him coming back soon or what the deal will be with that. And then I think second would probably be Curry because the ankle injuries were something that prolonged his early career, and now he's having this season's been the first time he's having multiple issues with his ankle, and the least concerning is Durant. It's a rib injury. If he's only out for 2 weeks because of a rib injury, I don't see it being a major thing. And luckily, basketball isn't a ton of contact. I mean, there's obviously more contact than people want to believe there is in basketball when you drive and everything else and you're bumping off people. But I don't think a rib injury is a major thing to have, even if he's a little sore coming back.
Yeah, they give you plenty of protective padding. Like, worst thing, he's just going to wear more rib padding. And I think the one thing about KD that makes it the least concerning is the fact he can still practice, get shots up, stay in a rhythm. He's just not going to be playing in the game. Where so Clay, you're worried about that thumb, the shooting stroke, and Curry, I'm just like slightly worried that the ankle can get re-aggravated in the playoffs and kind of linger. That'd be my concern with the Warriors. And like, is Clay going to find a shooting stroke? We don't really know. We've kind of mentioned on the last pod they'd probably be able to get away with it if Clay wasn't shooting 100%. But if Steph can't really roll, that'd really hurt the offense and the way that things run in Golden State. All right, let's move on to the playoff picture. Pretty much every week leading up to the playoffs, we're going to spend a good amount of time looking at the standings and what's going on. Obviously, it changes every day, every week, especially with the teams being that close. But we'll start with the East. The Raptors played a great game today with OKC. They did lose at home, but they were on a nice winning streak. But 5 games up on Boston. They look like they're going to be locked up in the 1 seed. What do you think? Locked up for Raptors in the 1 seed?
Definitely locked up. The injury bug hit the Celtics hard. There might have been a chance they caught the Raptors, but I don't even think they would have caught the Raptors even if they were as healthy as they have been without Hayward. Raptors have been a better team. It's locked up.
What's been the most impressive thing about the Raptors this season that you think people aren't noticing enough?
The contributions from 1 through 10. That's one of the few teams that goes extremely deep on their bench. They rely on almost everybody. They got multiple bigs who are very good. They have several point guards who have been good. Delon Wright, Fred VanVleet, CJ Miles. Although he's a streaky shooter, he is still another shooter they really haven't had in the past. And then Sakayam and all those other bigs they have. They've been really good. And OG, Anubo, obviously he's not a great scorer, but the defense he brings is something they kind of looked for in PJ Tucker. And he's a little bit younger, a little bit more athletic. So I like their depth. The depth has been the biggest thing to me about the Raptors. Lowry hasn't had to play those deep, long minutes that he has generally played with Toronto in the past. Obviously, DeRozan's having his best year to date. He's finally figured out how to shoot the ball. He still gets to the line, so he's become a more complete package. But I think the depth overall is what has made those 2 stars in particular even better and has made this Raptors team really good.
Yeah, I think that the bench, like you said, Fred VanVleet is definitely going to cause somebody problems in, a playoff matchup. He just picks up guys full court and really drives them nuts. And just all the different tools and depth. I've mentioned this on the OTG Twitter, is the fact, the rotation will shorten, but Casey will have different weapons he can throw at you and kind of mix and match with the opponent. I also like the fact that you mentioned DeRozan, the 3-point shot. I think that could be a really big factor if we can keep that percentage relatively relatively good in the playoffs, maybe something in the mid-30s. It doesn't have to be crazy. Just knock down the wide open ones where the teams have to respect you. And now DeRozan's that much more difficult to defend. But I think Dwayne Casey changing the offense and getting more ball movement, more playmaking from DeRozan, I think has really helped his team. And, in the latest OTG roundtable, Casey was a big favorite for winning Coach of the Year.
Yeah, he was my pick for Coach of the Year, along with several other of our OTG contributors. You can't, for a guy who has never really had much success in the playoffs so far, we'll have to see what happens this year. He has been notably on the hot seat. I think even before this year, he was kind of considered to be a guy who was on the hot seat if the Raptors don't produce, because the Raptors have been stuck between that 2 and 5 seed range in the Eastern Conference for the last, a handful of years, 5-6 years. And they really haven't seemed to be able to get over the hump. And finally, they're over the hump. Obviously, LeBron and the Cavs being bad, right? They've been bad. So it's turned the entire Eastern Conference kind of, around, like upside down, having LeBron and the Cavs not as dominant as we may have expected them to be, because it opened up the East. And obviously,
especially at this point in the season.
Yeah, exactly. Like it gave Dwayne Casey and the Raptors a chance to really elevate at least him as a coach, because it gave him a chance to really push the Raptors over the hump, because there isn't a dominant force in the East this year.
Yeah, and they can kind of go into the playoffs with a little bit more confidence. And I think that real hump is going to come in the playoffs, though. Obviously, if they've been to an Eastern Conference Finals and lost, but it just hasn't been the factor we thought they could win. This year, I think a lot of people believe they can get to the Eastern Conference Finals and win that and make an NBA Finals appearance. But we'll see what happens with that. Still plenty of time before the playoffs start, about a month right now. Boston in the number 2 seed. They look pretty locked up, 7 games ahead of whoever's behind them in the 3rd seed. Obviously, Kyrie's banged up. Marcus Smart is out indefinitely. Tice is out for the season. We mentioned on the previous pod. Thoughts on Boston right now? Just get healthy before the playoffs?
Yeah, you got to try and get healthy. Uh, Man, it's worrisome to me, especially because we don't really know the Kyrie injury. Out indefinitely to me is one of the worst things to see because you really don't know what that means. But I think for overall, their title hopes for this year are gone. Try and get as healthy as you can and make some noise, please the fans. But Boston's year for a title has gone and passed.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've definitely, sunk in our minds in confidence what we had going into the postseason. Early in the year, people might have picked them over Toronto or over Cleveland. Right now, with the injuries and just the lack of offensive rhythm you see sometimes from them, it's tough. But big props to Brad Stevens. Get some of these guys that, a lot of NBA fans, just a general NBA fan doesn't even know who they are, out there playing great. Terry Rozier's really stepped up his game with Kyrie out. But like you said, Boston just needs to get healthy, get more experience for those guys, and worry about next season with Gordon Hayward. But now on to the mess that is the rest of the Eastern Conference from the 3rd to 8th seed, which isn't very far apart. I believe 3.5 games between the 3rd and the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. So plenty of things can still change in there. We got the Cavs, the Wizards, the Pacers, the Sixers, the Bucks, the Heat. Let's start with the Cavs. You mentioned it. They haven't been good this season. They haven't been the team we expected, especially this part in the season. Usually they find a rhythm with the new trade pickups. We thought they'd be kind of finding a little bit more of a groove. Inside, they have some major concerns, some major injuries all across the board. Kevin Love should be making his return, though. So what are your thoughts on the Cavs, and what can Kevin Love do to this team and help them?
Somebody made a great point because I was saying, this trade at the deadline didn't work for the Cavs, and I was saying, it was they tried and it failed. And someone tweeted at me and said, "Well, Kevin Love's not even back." And I knew he wasn't back, obviously, because not having Kevin Love is kind of obvious. But I just didn't really pay not attention to it, but I didn't really put enough stake into it, I suppose. But he's a game changer. I mean, your average, if he comes back, it's a 20-10 guy automatically. It's another 20 points, another guy who can shoot the three, the guy who can rebound to a high degree, which is something the Cavs have really needed without Kevin Love. Obviously, Tristan Thompson is and out with an injury. Larry Nance Jr. has shown some good moments, but Kevin Love can make a huge impact. I mean, the Cavs can only win a first round and possibly a second round matchup in the Eastern Conference playoffs if they have Kevin Love. Because without Kevin Love right now, this current team is just not very good. It's too much LeBron and not enough anybody else. And if LeBron has a guy like Kevin Love, it will completely change the floor spacing, and I think even the confidence level in the Cavs to know that it's not just LeBron. We also have this guy, Kevin Love, who's a pretty good all-star.
And to some extent, he's taking pressure off LeBron in the scoring load, where LeBron can kind of focus on other things. That's where I think they need to do, because they need someone to really step up defensively, inside, rebounding, blocking. We know LeBron's kind of like a 5-tool player, but you can't expect him to do everything every night on every aspect of the game. So if they're able to get some more offensive pickup from K-Love, some of the other guys, rebounding wise too, maybe LeBron could spend a little bit more energy on defense and really help his team. Moving on from the Cavs, though, we'll see what happens with Love returns, if the other guys get healthy, if they can find a rhythm. We never want to sleep on LeBron, like we've mentioned about a million times in this pod, so they're always a scary team. But the Wizards are another team they're a hard team to gauge. Without John Wall, they've been kind of all over the place. They had a pretty nice win over the Pacers last night. It kind of came to a surprise. What are your thoughts on the Wizards and the possibility of, John Wall returning and what they could do in the playoffs?
They obviously, I mean, when John Wall first went down, they were one of the hottest teams in the East. Everyone's saying, better without Wall, which, as we know, since they came back down to earth, that's simply not true. With John Wall, everything changes. I mean, anytime you're adding back a superstar or a superstar caliber player, John Wall, or any player for that matter, to a team that's already on the brink of being, a home court advantage team, it's a game changer. I mean, John Wall and the Wizards, they can make a run. We know how good that offense has been in the past when John Wall is on the floor and he's healthy and Bradley Beal is healthy. When those two guys, even though there may be some chemistry issues, they may not like each other as much as they want us to believe. they can get it done on the floor. Those two guys are tremendous together. Otto Porter Jr. cannot be slept on. I think it could change everything, especially because, it's funny, Wednesday we hyped up the Pacers as they were a 3 seed and they were playing really good basketball. Then they had a tough loss to the Raptors, and now they're a little banged up without, Miles Turner's dealing with an ankle injury, Sabonis dealing with an ankle injury. So now they're a little banged up, and they had a bad loss, in my opinion, to the Wizards. So it makes the East again, like you mentioned before. The 3 through 8 seed is just a complete shit show. You don't know what could happen.
Yeah.
Because on any given night, it looks like one team could maybe start to go on a run and be more dominant, and then we're talking 3 games later, and it could be a completely different story.
When do you think Wall needs to get back? I think he started practicing with the team last week. When do you think he needs to get back to get ready for the postseason and actually really impact the game? Obviously, you don't want to bring him back in the first round and just throw him out there for playoff basketball when he hasn't played in a while. So what would be a good date to get him back and get him back in rhythm before the playoffs?
We're March 17th. I would say by April 1st. He's got to be back. He's got to have 2 solid weeks of regular season basketball to really, so the team as a whole can get everything together, because you can't just put a guy in and expect the team to take off. I think he's got to be back by the end of this month to really early next month.
Due to the fact he probably won't be 100%, do you think he'll take a little bit of a step back to Bradley Beal or no?
I doubt it. It may be the smart move, but I doubt it. Wall's a competitor. He's got too much fire and pride, I think, to take a step back, because he still treats it like it's his team, which it still is his team. But I don't see him deferring to anyone. I think when he's on the floor, he's gonna still be the John Wall we've seen to come and love these last 4 or 5 years where he's really taken off.
Yeah, and I mean, you could probably make the argument he'd be one of the, in the Eastern Conference, one of the best players that anybody's going to get back before the playoffs if he's healthy. If he could get back to that level of being healthy, which we didn't see this season where he definitely was a little bit off, I think that'd be big for Washington and really kind of change the Eastern Conference landscape and kind of change expectations, because the rest of the Wizard role players, and like we mentioned, Bradley Beal has taken another step in his game, could be a fun matchup with almost anybody. But talking your Pacers, 2 straight losses. You mentioned injuries, a little banged up. Are you worried, or do you think they'll kind of bounce back, find some rhythm, or are you worried about the schedule?
I mean, as we know, the schedule for the Pacers is one of the toughest in the entire Eastern Conference. Actually, the NBA. I think they have the 5th hardest schedule in the NBA. They have the Warriors coming up on the schedule, which is actually like the best time to play the Warriors.
Yeah, low-key blessing.
I was actually looking forward to see how the Pacers matched up against the Warriors. But now I don't really have to worry about that because the Warriors are a little bit banged up. I'm a little concerned, obviously. The Pacers haven't been very good interior-wise the entire year. I know that actually every month they've gotten better and better at the points allowed in the paint. For example, they started off 28th in the league in points allowed in the paint, and currently they're like 13th. So they've really gotten better. I know it's still 13th, but that's a lot better than 28th. So they've been making strides that way. Miles Turner obviously was kind of just catching his groove when he tweaked his ankle against the Raptors. Sabonis being out hurts. It's worrisome to me whenever Al Jefferson has to be the starting center. Obviously, Big Al has played great in the minutes he's been given, and with the injuries we've had throughout the year, he's been tremendous, and he's obviously a great veteran leadership. But Al Jefferson playing starter minutes is not winning basketball in the current age of the NBA. So it's a little worrisome. But hopefully they just win the games they should win, because that's the biggest thing to me. There's always these games in the schedule. Even if the schedule's really hard, there are still games in that tough schedule that you have to win. They're the games that you should win. And those are going to be the most important games right now for the Pacers until they get fully healthy.
Yeah, I think for me, other than the schedule, I'd be a little concerned about the Miles Turner ankle injury, because before he got hurt, he definitely, like you mentioned, I think on a previous pod, he was really stepping up when he was playing like Embiid and felt like he was starting to be a little bit more of an inside presence with some aggression coming on late. And obviously, injuries tend to make players more passive.
Go ahead.
I
just want to say I agree with that, especially because he was starting to really bully people down low. And if he feels, any kind of discomfort, or he doesn't feel like the ankle is 100%, we may not see him continue that aggression that he was starting to play with. He might go back to playing, a little bit softer, and that would be the real issue.
Are you concerned? This is a little bit off topic. Are you concerned with Miles Turner long-term injury-wise? Does he have a tendency to be banged up a lot, or do you think it's something he'll kind of phase out of when he puts on some more, muscle?
I'm not overly concerned, only because he's had a concussion. The concussions, like, that's just something that
Bad
happens.
luck.
Yeah, that's bad luck. He hasn't really had any major ankle injuries. This is like his first real ankle injury. I know he fractured his thumb his rookie season, so I'm not concerned, only because the injuries have been kind of all over. I'm more concerned when someone has, like, knee tendonitis or a sprained ankle on the same ankle like 5 or 6 times. Like, injuries that repeat in the same spot, those are the injuries I worry about. But a tweak of an ankle, and if you watch the play, he was simply standing there and Kyle Lowry fell over his ankle. It's just, it's one of those things, wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, a lot of NBA injuries, just honestly bad luck. Let's move on to Philly, though. This is another team that's kind of been all over the place. It's a team that you probably could have seen as high as fourth, but now down to, that 6 and 7 spot. And they're kind of inconsistent for me. This is a team I'm very high on in terms of, talent wise, but they had 2 close wins over the Knicks and Nets, which they probably could have easily lost both of those games. So what are your thoughts on Philly and kind of needing to fine tune their team before the playoffs start?
I'm okay with it. I'm actually not too worried about the 76ers. They added a lot of pieces in at the through the deadline and the buyout market with Ilyasova and Marco Bellinelli. I just think they're trying to work everything in. They got to figure out the rotations and everything else. Brett Brown has made some questionable decisions. Markelle Fultz, have we gotten a ruling on him? I mean, he's playing more and more in practice and everything else. I don't know if we'll see him this year, but
I doubt it.
It's weird that entire situation actually gets, it doesn't get talked about enough, probably, because I see videos every day of this guy practicing and shooting, but we don't get any timetable or anything when it comes to Markelle Fultz. But I think they'll be okay, the Sixers, because mainly when it comes to the playoffs, they have, as long as Embiid is on the floor, they have a mixed match because Embiid is a beast. He's tremendous. He's a top 5 center in this league. He's almost unguardable at times. And I think Ben Simmons is growing up in front of our eyes a lot quicker than I think I projected earlier on in the season. Obviously, the offense for him is a little strugglesome because he can't shoot. But with all the shooters they have around him, JJ and, as I mentioned, Marco and Ilyasova can't shoot the ball. I'm okay with this team. I think they'll be okay compared to teams like the Bucks, who just look atrocious to me.
I think one thing about Simmons that helps from the fact that he can't shoot is his ability to hit tough shots in the paint in that close range area. Like, he hits a ton of contested shots where teams are playing great defense on him, but he just feels so comfortable around the rim. He's able to just kind of, just pop the ball in, hit it off the glass. You can just tell he played a ton of basketball and is used to being around the rim a lot and getting in the paint. And he's just a tough defend because if you play too much off of him, especially if he has some momentum, he's a tough guy to kind of get control of, just kind of get the angle in the paint, allows him to score. And like you mentioned, Embiid with his size and his ability to really dominate a game, I think one thing I'll be intrigued about is what happens with Embiid's playoff minutes. Is there going to be games where he's going to have to play a ton of minutes? Simmons, there's not really much injury concern. He's fine from last year. It's more so the Embiid. Is he going to play a lot? What's he going to do when a team's really bang around with him and try to make life difficult? I want to see what happens when, that comes to partake.
The good thing about the playoffs are that he won't have to play back-to-back nights.
Yeah,
that's
usually
the one
2 days
benefit.
rest. Usually a lot of 2-day rest, which helps.
Right, which is huge, I think, for a guy like Embiid, who, as we know, he didn't even play back-to-back the first half of this year. They waited until after January to start letting him play back-to-backs. So I think the rest will be something that benefits him tremendously when it comes to playoff time. But you're right. He's never really had to play. He might have to play a couple 40-minute games in the playoffs for all we know, depending on how the game's going. So it'll be interesting to see how he bounces back from that.
And this has been obviously the longest season he's played. So I think there's some question marks with that, but maybe I think it'd be smart to get him a couple games of rest. If the Sixers are okay being not really aiming for that home court, maybe getting him a few games of rest to get him 100%. But I think one thing that makes Philly a little bit scary is some of the shooters they have, like a JJ Redick, a Marco Bellinelli, some guys in the playoffs that could get hot, knock down 5 or 6 threes and really change the game. And I think they're just a team that nobody really wants to play because you never know what young stars are going to do in their first playoff matchup. We could see Embiid average 30, 15, and 5 and 2, and Simmons average a triple-double. It's not out of this world to think.
No, especially if they get a certain, if they get the right matchup, then it's even more likely to happen. For example, like, say, in whatever universe they somehow, the Bucks get a little bit hotter and let's say the Sixers get the 3 seed, or they and the Bucks are a 6 seed. Like the Bucks to me are a team that anybody right now wants to play in the Eastern Conference.
They're out of sorts. Moving on to the Bucks, though, I think one major thing for them is the injuries, having to play Jason Terry a lot, Malcolm Brogdon being banged up, Delly being banged up, and just like they had some real initial burst after Jason Kidd was fired, but they kind of lost that. There's also been some rumor about Jabari Parker being upset about his role, kind of not finding his rhythm back with that team. But what do you think's going on in Milwaukee?
I just think it's a team that's not really put together well. The Eric Bledsoe trade on paper looked good, but then I saw a tweet the other day, and it kind of rang home. It kind of hit home with me. It said that the idea of Eric Bledsoe is always better than actual Eric Bledsoe. And because when you watch a game, Eric Bledsoe is like he's just very tough to understand. Because I feel like he's actually a lot better than I feel like he should be a lot better than he is. And at times, I think the fit between him and Middleton and Antetokounmpo, and now trying to add in Parker, who Parker's right. And if you watch any game since he's come back, he is not as involved as he was previously before he tore his ACL last year. And obviously, he's never really played with Middleton. They haven't had a ton of floor time in general with his career there. And now he has also Eric Bledsoe that has, needs usage. So I do agree that Jabari is kind of the odd man out as of right now. And then the big man, I think Thon Maker, I don't see what anyone has ever seen in Thon Maker. I see so average. I don't see anything that pops off the page. He has some nice moments, but for them, if they had gotten a guy like DeAndre Jordan, I think the Bucks' second half would have been completely different.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Eric Bledsoe trade, looking at it, even back when we were discussing it, there was always question marks about his shooting, his ability to fit in, especially with someone like Giannis who always has the ball. And then getting back somebody like Parker who doesn't necessarily shoot amazing from three, is the spacing going to be hurt? And I think the thing with Thon Maker is he's more of a developmental piece, and I think he would really benefit from having a pass-first type of point guard. At only 21 years old, I still think there's plenty for him to improve on. And I've seen the flashes offensively and defensively where I think the development just needs to be there. And I don't think he's ready to be that star center right now. But if they did add somebody big time, it would have helped. But I still think this team just could have added some nice shooters. Like, I think whenever you have somebody like Giannis Antetokounmpo, you want to be able to just spread the floor as much as possible, get him in a one-on-one situation, or even get some shooting bigs where you can pull that center away from the rim. When Giannis has to go into a crowded paint, he's not going to be successful.
No, I 100% agree. Antetokounmpo, we mentioned this at time too. At times he has to do too much. It feels like a lot of times everyone's waiting to get Antetokounmpo.
And then he kind of has to force it.
Make a move.
Yeah, and then it kind of leads him to force it sometimes, and it's kind of on him. It's on the team as well. I mean, it's just like a confusing team, and it's just not what Milwaukee wants at this time. Obviously, there's still time to get the ship going in the right direction before the playoffs, but right now, 4-6 in their last 10, definitely nothing to be happy about.
Yeah, and at this stage, too, of Antetokounmpo's career, he doesn't have a real jump shot. This team really struggles in the half-court set. Unless they're out and running, they're just not that good. There's not enough floor spacing on this floor when Antetokounmpo is in the half-court set because you know what he's going to do. You know what I'm saying? It's easier to limit Antetokounmpo in the half-court set because all right, I just got to keep him out of this 15-foot range and make him beat us with a jump shot, or make him defer to someone else to beat us.
And I think that some of the lingering effects of Jason Kidd being the coach, the offense not really being set up properly, bring another coach in there, they're going to be able to kind of capitalize on offense and make it revolve around Antetokounmpo. Even maybe Kidd to an extent didn't know Antetokounmpo would take this big of a leap this year. We kind of forget about how, much he's improved, but, still plenty of time for a young guy like him. Moving on to the Heat. And honestly, there's not much to say about the Heat. They're just like the Heat. Like, they're just this tough-ass team. They always compete. They have these guys. They get team contributions. Dwayne Wade's back. They have injuries. Guys step up. It's like and it's not a bad thing when I say this. It's like the same Heat every year. You know what I mean? Like, you just know they're going to compete.
No, I 100% agree. Eric Spoelstra's a tremendous coach. He's done tremendous things. Since LeBron has left, he's really shown that he's not just the LeBron. I've mentioned it so many times. He's not just a coach that had LeBron James and arguably one of the best teams ever assembled with Wade and Bosh. He's more than that. He's a fantastic coach, and he's actually I think gotten better since LeBron has left.
For
And we
sure.
mentioned this on the previous pod, I think. No one wants to play Miami in the first round. I don't think any team, they're similar to the Spurs in that aspect. You don't want to play the Spurs, the Miami Heat in the first round because those two teams are so well coached. And in 7 games, the coaches make a huge impact in the 7-game series. More so, I think, than people realize at times through game planning and
Adjustments
strategy.
are huge.
And yes, and I think Spoelstra in a 7-game series, like if somehow Miami got matched up with the Celtics in the first round, especially with how the Celtics are right now, the Celtics would be in huge trouble. I don't know. I don't think they win that series personally. If they had to go up against Miami in the first round, I think between the rebounding deficiencies that the Celtics have already, and then just the simple fact that they are so banged up, Miami could really exploit that. Because even last year, Miami make playoffs last year? They just missed out.
They just missed. They were pretty pissed at the Nets because they sat their guys against the Bulls and the Bulls won. But
Right, they were 31-11 to end the year, and that's just coaching right there. That was a team that had no superstar, and even now there's no superstar on this Miami Heat team. There's a couple All-Stars, a bunch of really good role players, and a ton of young developing guys.
yeah, and you probably
And
call
a
them
few
borderline
veterans.
all-stars. You've probably called,
Right.
And one thing about Spoelstra too, he's done a pretty good job developing guys like Richardson, Tyler Johnson, and even last year when they had a whole bunch of guys come up on 10-day contracts. Bam Adebayo, who's been pretty good this year as well, especially with Whiteside being out. I think Boston would still win the series, but I think Miami would just grind it out, and they just play tough as hell. I don't know why when I think of the Heat and playing the playoffs, I just think of having to match up with James Johnson for 7 games and him just being so physical and just tiring the shit out of somebody and it kind of lingering into the next round.
No, 100%. I could totally see that as well.
Even Toronto, they would win the series, but it's do I really feel like dealing with Miami? If they're going to be just annoying and really grind out the game, even if they only push it 5 or 6, it's just the fact that they are just going to make you earn every second of it. But before we move on from the East, Corey, is it surprising to you that there is no race for the 8th seed in the East? Going to the season, I think we thought more teams would be in the race. What do you think on that now?
No, I'm not really. All right, sorry. Syracuse somehow just beat Michigan State, and it just popped up on my screen, and I'm just a little bit in awe that somehow Syracuse upset Michigan State. But all right, back to the topic. Wow. I'm a little shocked, but not really because of the injuries. I mean, the Knicks had a chance to kind of push maybe the 8th seed, and Porzingis got hurt, and now they've been a dumpster fire, which is what they should have been to start with. And then the Pistons probably.
The Pistons got to be a big-ass disappointment.
Yeah, they're a disappointment, especially since they made the move to get Blake Griffin, and it was talked about that it was supposed to be the move to make them a serious threat in the East. That was what everyone was saying from the Pistons organization was this: we wanted to win basketball. This was a move to become a dominant team in the Eastern Conference, and they have done the complete opposite since then. Obviously, Reggie Jackson has been out for most of this year. He still isn't back, and actually, his career is kind of, to me, worrisome because he can't stay on the floor right now. So they've been a disappointment. And then I think the Hornets, too, you have to say they're a disappointment because they just, every year, on paper, they look like they can be a team that at least push for an 8 seed, and they finish, 5 to 6 games out every year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised. I thought there would be a race for the 8th seed. Even beginning of the season, even early in the season, and then even at the trade deadline, it looked like at least Detroit would kind of make it interesting. But like you said, they've been pretty bad. 2-8 in their last 10, 9 games over 500. That Blake Griffin's really struggled shooting wise in Detroit. The spacing was always a concern for me with Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin. And the Hornets, 10 games under 500, ton of cap out there. They made the move for Dwight. I didn't expect them to do anything special, but I thought they'd at least compete for the 8th seed and be in the realm of, at least having a shot and not being 10 games under 500. And like you said, the Knicks, Porzingis being banged up, they were surprised. I think if you're really thinking about it, and I hate to say this, but Orlando fans must really hate this season. I don't know if you remember early on in the year, the first month of the season, they were on fire. They had a top 4 seed. They were 5 to 8 games over 500. Now they're sitting at 21-49. Second worst record in the Eastern Conference. How big of a drop-off is that?
I mean, yeah, they had they were one of the first teams to, I think, 12 or 13 wins.
And they look good. They were shooting, their offense was working, and then they got injuries, and everybody just cooled off real quick.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Gordon was unconscious from 3. I remember he went 5 for 5 against the Nets.
Yeah, it went from a tropical climate to like a complete desert real quick. Like it's wild how much that happened. You feel bad for the Magic fans because it looked like it might be a positive season, but then another season of not knowing what really is going on, who to keep, big question mark with Aaron Gordon. But that's for another day. Moving on to the Western Conference, which is I don't know which one would you say is more exciting, the Western or Eastern Conference playoff race?
It's got to be the West. Anytime you have teams that are, you know, just outside
When it's do or die,
of
pretty
the
much.
right, like they get it's a 10 team. It's a 3 through 10 in the West is wide open, while in the East it's three through 8. Anytime you're adding more teams to a playoff race, it's going to make it more interesting to me.
Yeah. And I think the fact that the East is already locked up in the sense that all those teams are essentially going to be in the playoffs, where like the Clippers and the Nuggets are right on the cusp right now, being a game and a half back and the potential to get in there with the remaining season. But let's start at the top. The Rockets, we mentioned it before, with the KD injury, all the Warriors banged up. It looks like that 2.5 game lead they have on the first seed is going to be enough to lock it up for the year. You agree?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's any way anyone catches the Rockets. The Warriors are too banged up. The Rockets have been fantastic with Chris Paul and James Harden both on the floor. For all the concerns we had going into the year on how they may share the floor and everything else, they've managed it brilliantly. And the offense, D'Antoni's in the running for Coach of the Year. This team is tremendous, and actually they've actually taken a slight step back, I think, since adding Joe Johnson. I think Joe Johnson gets way too many minutes for the Rockets. I think they kind of just play him because he's Joe Johnson. I actually think Gerald Green should be getting the minutes that Joe Johnson gets because of how he can push the floor and he's more of a guy who can run with the team. And Joe Johnson's just a little bit older. But besides that, this Rockets team is extremely good.
And then, Ryan Anderson should be back healthy 100% soon, and that's going to kind of change the lineup. I know D'Antoni mentioned he'd like to have a bigger rotation going to the playoffs this year than last season, which was obviously a major downfall for them in that Spurs series. So we'll see what happens with Houston, and just they're kind of an exciting team. And I to get on that Chris Paul and James Harden point, I mentioned this on the preview pod. I always had a good feeling it was going to work because why would Chris Paul go there if he didn't, want to make it work? Same thing with James Harden. It's not like they did this deal without those two communicating. Those two are the ones that set up this thing to happen. So it's not like Daryl Morey was like, yo, James, I'm going to bring in Chris Paul. You got to make it work. It was like Chris Paul and James Harden talking, being like, we can make this thing work. We could probably beat the Warriors. And I think that confidence for Houston, getting that one seed, having the best record in the NBA this year, I think it'll be enough to give them a little boost playoff time.
I agree. It will be a plenty of boost. Probably exactly what they need.
I mean, I like super excited for that series already. I mean, there's a possibility it might not happen for some miraculous reason. One of these Western Conference teams could step up. The Warriors' injuries could linger. Somebody could get hurt on Houston. But in best case scenario, we're seeing Golden State and Houston Rockets in the Western Conference Final going 7 games.
Which is
With
all we all. Which honestly, because of how the East is, our NBA Finals very well, like what we hope for an NBA Finals, may take place in the Western Conference Finals.
And there's nothing wrong with that, really. I know people are so upset about it, but like at the end of the day, I don't really mind the conferences. Some years the East wins, some years the West wins. This year it just happens that the West has two really stacked teams. But
And it's always happened like that to a degree. I mean, think about the Miami Heat Boston Celtic, rivalry when they were going back at each other, in the 2011 and 2012 when they were, going at each other. It's okay to have the two best teams in the conference go to against each other and have the finals not be, not as exciting. It's okay to have that. It's not a bad thing.
yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee the finals is going to be the best matchup every single year. Like, I mean, you look at the NFL in the sense the Super Bowl isn't always the best game of the season. Sometimes that game sucks. I mean, I think what was it a couple years ago at MetLife Stadium? It was like Seahawks and Broncos. It was like 48-20 or something. Like, there's nothing you can do. It happens. Moving on to number 2, Golden State. I think we'll pretty much lock them in, at the 2 seed. And like we mentioned before, I think they're just being smart, resting their guys, getting prepped for the role players. I think even Draymond, who's struggled a little bit, kind of getting the ball, more touches, running the show a little bit with everybody out, kind of help get everybody going come playoff time. I just can't wait to see the Warriors play, the Rockets play. I'm just excited thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean the two best teams. We got our big dogs are gearing up for the. I mean, we're right here, Nick. I don't care what anyone says. Once I get to like the All-Star weekend, I'm ready to fast forward to the most part right into the playoffs. Like I I know the season 8 being 82 games is beautiful, and I'm okay with it being 82 games. But I do wish sometimes it was shorter because the playoffs to me are simply the most entertaining time for almost any sport, especially for basketball.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's just like warming up right now. You can like smell the playoffs are almost here. You see teams talking about it, all the quotes, all the injuries. Now it's like I think at this point in the season you feel really comfortable making a take about a player, making a take about a team, making a take about a tendency that somebody does. Earlier in the year, even middle of the season, it gets to the point where like, all right, he could have a good first half, a bad second half, vice versa type of things like that. At this point in the year, I think you're feeling a lot more confident what you think about everybody around the league.
Yeah, and generally, like for example, what you think in November, October, you may not think that in December, January, and then you may not think it in February and March, and then near the end of March and April, you're finding out your final thoughts on most teams.
Exactly. And I mean, and we say that final thoughts, and then there's still question marks. We mentioned the East with guys coming back like Kevin Love and John Wall, and then we mentioned the Warriors injuries. So even still question marks, but still a better idea. Moving on to 3, and this is a team that continues to impress, 12 games straight. That's the Portland Trailblazers, and Dame Lillard has been killing it. What are your thoughts on the Blazers and them just, getting up to the top of the West, which is something, we mentioned probably on like 3 straight pods we didn't expect, but it's still just a surprise.
I wonder if Melo's upset he want to go to Portland now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
What?
just figure I think throw that out there. It'd be interesting to see another guy. I mean, obviously Lillard and McCollum, those two guys are great together. Lillard's killing it, but it'd be really interesting to see what they could be if they had just another guy to take some of the scoring load off of those guys because Nurkic has been up and down. He's had some nice moments and everything else, but there was a point in the season where he wasn't even really getting minutes because he wasn't playing hard enough.
Yeah.
So it would have been interesting to see what this team would have been if they had, even if they got like a Damari Carroll, who we mentioned, I think on the trade deadline special we did, that he might have been a really nice piece for Portland. But they've
He's
been
playing great
fantastic.
right now too.
Yeah, he is. He is. RHJ, Ronnie Hollis Jefferson, was giving him some praise, I think, last night after the game.
Yep.
But yeah, the Blazers have been great, and they're one of those teams that they're always slept on. They're kind of always underestimated to a degree. I know that the first half of every year, it feels like Damian Lillard is very quiet, and you don't see a ton from him. Then near the All-Star break, he starts talking a little bit more, saying he better be an All-Star. And then sometimes he makes, sometimes he doesn't make it. And then the second half of the year, it doesn't really matter whether he makes it or not. He goes on a complete tear and just goes off. He goes berserk. When he starts smelling the playoff hunt, Lillard goes into straight Dame time for about 2 months. It's fantastic. Terry Stotts has put his name into the Coach of the Year race. They're one of the top 5 teams, I believe, in defensive rating and in offensive rating, which is absurd because you look at that roster and you see Lillard and McCollum and you think this team is really top 5 in offensive rating. Because everybody else is just efficient. Everyone knows their roles. The Blazers have been for real. They've been really good. And the win over the Warriors last week, to me, was what said that this team, although I don't think they beat the Warriors or the Rockets, they can really beat some of these other teams in the West.
They can make an interesting series. You mentioned Dame since February 2nd, averaging over 31 points a game, 45% from the field, just a shade under 40% from 3, six assists, 4 rebounds, and a steal. So he's just been putting up monster numbers, and he's the type of guy that could kind of just win you a playoff game by himself. He could probably put up 50 in a game. Then you look at the combination of him and McCollum. I think you could easily see a 70, 80-point game between the two of those guys. And you mentioned, I think the team in general being 7th in defensive rating. And, I think just having that team mentality has really helped this team. We mentioned some of the depth pieces stepping up. But moving on from there, OKC. OKC's found themselves in a pretty good position, especially after some mid-season struggles, early season struggles, just some struggles all over the place where they were just playing down to their competition. Finding a little bit more of a rhythm. There's still some worrisome, but the win they had over Toronto to get today on the road was very big, and it was their 6th straight game. What are your thoughts on OKC right now?
The bench is still bad. All right, I want to say that first off. The bench is bad. They still don't have a ton of help on this team. And I know people are going to say, well, they got Paul George and Carmelo and Adam. Yeah, they have nice pieces, but this team is not deep. The bench to me is still very worrisome. Obviously, Roberson being gone for the year is a terrible loss. Corey Brewer, hats off to him. I love him from being his Florida Gator days. Him and the Billy Donovan connection. seems to be working out. I feel like he knows how to use Corey Brewer. When Corey Brewer was in the Florida Gator uniform, Donovan often had Brewer just run. He just run the floor. We'll get you the ball and outlet passes for Horford or Joakim Noah. Run the floor, and we've seen that in OKC now. Westbrook runs up the floor. And he's got a streaking Corey Brewer or cutting Corey Brewer. That just adds a new dynamic to this Thunder team that they kind of have, but they really didn't have since Roberson went down. And then obviously Melo has been extremely good from the 3-point range recently. Paul George has been a little streaky, but as long as Paul George shows up, which he normally does in the playoffs, I'm at times very critical of Paul George. But when it comes to postseason play, Paul George never takes a game off. He generally plays his best basketball in the postseason, which is all the Thunder want at this point. And I think you mentioned this off the pod. Westbrook had just 1 3 attempt today, and he had 36 points. When Westbrook's doing that and he's not shooting the ball from deep like a maniac, he gets a triple-double, and Steven Adams is beasting down low, this Thunder's team is really, really tough to beat.
Yeah, I mean, when you have discipline from Westbrook, they're a different team. And that's not saying he can't be Russell Westbrook. He just needs to tone it down at times. We don't need those pull-up threes all the time. And you mentioned, not having the depth on this team. That's why I think coaching might be the most important aspect for the Thunder in the playoffs. It's going to be the rotations that Billy Donovan puts out there, managing having Paul George or Russell Westbrook out there at all times and maybe giving them at least a Melo or an Adams. Sometimes in the regular season, you've seen him go full bench squad out there. I think they're not going to be able to do that in the playoffs. And just like you said, quick shout out to Brewer, who's been great in OKC, shooting over 40% from three. And I think that's going to be a number we want to keep an eye on going to the playoffs. So you can keep knocking down the three, running the fast break. That's a huge addition. But on to Utah. This is a team that is super hot. Now, they are 9-1 in their last 10. And if I did my math correctly, over their last 24 games, they are 21-3.
21-3. Tremendous. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell is my rookie of the year. I think he's fantastic. I think he is a scoring phenomenal scorer. When Rudy Gobert came back, this team just took off. Donovan Mitchell kept them alive while Gobert was down. And with Gobert in, this team is just taking off. Quinn Snyder, another guy arguably could be coach of the year because of what he's had to do in another year where they had a ton of injuries playing. Yeah. Well, the defense doesn't ever slip. Doesn't matter who's out there on the floor. The defense is still a top 10 defense, which is tremendous. Jay Crowder has been a good addition for them, I think. I think he just fits right into that tough, gritty mentality that Utah has. And Utah is a team I don't think anyone wants to play in the first round because, as they say, defense wins championships.
Yeah, and Gobert, you mentioned, has been a monster. He's been probably Defensive Player of the Year. I just retweeted something on the OTG account where he's leading so many defensive categories. And the Jazz, when Gobert plays, is 29-15. Their current record, just overall in the season, is 40-30. So if they had Gobert all year, we could be talking about a top 3 seed for sure, or maybe even competing with, Golden State or Houston, just the level that Gobert gets them, and then having a rookie like Donovan Mitchell, and then just Quinn Snyder getting great play out of guys. Like you mentioned, Jay Crowder coming here, his dad played in Utah, getting that extra energy, that extra juice. It just really helps the team. So, I wouldn't want to mess with them in the first round. I don't think they're going to cause any major problems. I don't know if they could even they could probably win a first round series, but they're not a team that I want to play regardless, even if I don't have them winning.
A OKC Utah Jazz first round series would be extremely fun to see.
A really good battle between Steven Adams and Rudy Gobert, and then also Gobert versus Westbrook in terms of protecting the rim. There's just almost every matchup in the West is going to be fun because a lot of these teams are around the same level. Even the teams that match up with Houston and Golden State should at least be able to give them some type of challenge in a certain way. Moving on to Minnesota, though, Timberwolves. What are your thoughts on them right now? Pretty much they just need Jimmy Butler back to kind of get this thing going because they really could use a home court advantage. Their record on the road is 14-22.
Yeah, I know I saw a stat last night. Derrick Rose has played 33 minutes, and they've been outscored by 37 points in those 33 minutes. God. So the Derrick Rose experiment clearly is not going very well in Minnesota.
We never thought it would.
No, we didn't. We did not. We certainly did not. He's just – it sucks, but his career, I think, is over. Like you mentioned, Jimmy Butler, whenever he gets back, will be exactly what the Timberwolves need. I know Andrew Wiggins has been I think he's averaging with Jimmy Butler like 16 points per game or whatever, or 17 points per game. And then like since Jimmy Butler's been gone, he's averaging like 21.4, and he's been more efficient. So that's good for Wiggins. Hopefully, maybe he can kind of keep that going with Jimmy Butler back. But I know he's also voiced some concerns about not liking his role behind Jimmy Butler.
Step up in other aspects of your game. Like, it's not like you're playing perfect ball. You pull up a ton from mid-range, a lot of contested pull-ups. Like, nobody likes to see that. If you want to get more touches, do some of the right things, play some defense like Jimmy Butler does. Like, I think, Wiggins, one thing that probably annoys, Timberwolves fans is he could probably be an elite defender and cause a lot of mayhem. And then they'd have Jimmy Butler and him out there, and it would be a real problem for a lot of teams, including teams like Houston and Golden State. But instead, he wants to complain.
Yeah, just play winning basketball. That's my mentality for guys.
You got plenty of time left in your career too.
Yeah.
It's not like you're old.
Yeah, and you have an opportunity to play with one of the best two-way players in the game. You still got your boy Karl-Anthony Towns there. I think you just got to suck it up. Karl-Anthony Towns obviously been fantastic. For the Timberwolves, it's all about how soon Jimmy Butler gets on the floor, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Moving on to the Spurs, and it's pretty much a similar thing over there. The Spurs are great. They're having a good season considering they're missing their best player majority of the season, but they're not really going to cause any problems or even make me feel confident in locking into a playoff seed until Kawhi is back. And we don't even know if he will be back. I mean, it was mentioned that he would be back last Thursday. He didn't come back. There's talk about him coming back this week. We really don't know.
Biggest question mark, hands down.
Yeah.
Kawhi Leonard completely flips the script on the San Antonio Spurs season, because you add Kawhi Leonard in, I don't care what seed the Spurs are. As I mentioned when we were talking about the Heat, because of Greg Popovich being one of the best coaches in the league, you give Greg Popovich Kawhi Leonard healthy, or even 90% healthy, or whatever the case is, along with Aldridge, who has been at a career best in San Antonio this year. That team's tough, and I don't think any team in the West, whether you're the Thunder, Warriors, Rockets, any team, you don't want to see the Spurs in the first round if Kawhi is back.
Even if Kawhi's not back, it's just not an ideal matchup in the sense like you'll probably win, but you're going to actually have to win the game. They're not going to be like, all right, here's the game. They're going to make you earn it, slow down the pace, especially if Kawhi's out and the offense isn't cooking. Team to keep an eye on. And then another team, like I said, all these teams in the West are not a fun matchup in the first round. The Pelicans, they have a guy like Anthony Davis who's just on a monster of a tear. And they're obviously Cousins is out, and they're not going to get him back with the Achilles. But still, they have other guys stepping up: Etuan Moore, Darius Miller. There's guys, Ian Clark, guys on this team really stepping up and helping the Pelicans stay in that playoff race.
Yeah, Anthony Davis is a freak. His tear is so close to Damian Lillard's. I know you tweeted out their stat line, I believe, last night, and it's both those guys are being ridiculously unguardable at this point in the year. Anthony Davis said, "Take your hot takes about us sucking without DeMarcus Cousins, shove them where the sun don't shine," because they, like you mentioned, they took off. They've been playing great basketball. I know they had a tough loss last night, and Alvin Gentry was fined $15,000 for complaining for Anthony Davis not getting calls, which he made a good point. Anthony Davis doesn't necessarily get the kind of calls you would expect from a guy his big who, is constantly in the paint and doing everything else that he does. And Anthony Davis, unlike DeMarcus Cousins, even from watching, he really does not complain about not getting calls.
He doesn't complain that much.
Next play. Yeah,
but I will say, I saw a stat tweeted out today where Anthony Davis, I think, gets the most foul call, top 3 in foul calls per game or free throw attempts per game. So I think he probably could get more fouls, but to say that he doesn't get any calls would be kind of like, eh.
Right. It's one of those things where you not that you minimize it, but you look at a small sample size because it's one game where you lost possibly because there weren't enough fouls called. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, you're right. If that's the case, then it's an outlier in a sample set.
And I can understand it going against Houston where they're going to call touch fouls on the outside and they're not going to call the same touch fouls on the inside. LeBron's brought it up. It is somewhat of a concern, but in some ways it makes sense. The slightest touch on a three-point shot is going to impact you a lot more than if you're shooting a layup in the paint, especially if you're used to the contact. I mean, anybody who's played organized basketball has been fouled around the rim and not gotten the call a million of times. So usually when you're going in the paint, your mindset is to make the layup through contact. You're just hoping to get the foul call.
100%.
And when you shoot threes, like, you get a slight touch on the elbow when you're shooting a three, that might just hit the front of the rim, the side of the rim, look like an air ball, and you look like a noob. But moving on to the Clippers, this is a team. I mean, it's like the Clippers probably are going to be one of the teams on the outside looking in. It just seems like the lack of star power and the lack of like they just don't have that same pop as the other teams. What are your thoughts on the Clippers? You think they're going to get in, or you think they're going to slide out?
They'll probably just miss out. I know Gallinari's like out for the year or whatever.
Injuries have
More
killed
than
them,
likely.
so it's not even a
Yeah.
bad season. They don't make it, and they arguably traded their best player in Blake Griffin. So
Right.
they don't make it. Who
And
cares?
honestly, Tobias Harris since that trade has been everything
Fire.
the Clippers have wanted. He's really flipped the script. Orlando probably is still kicking themselves in the foot for letting him go along with Oladipo. But I think they're okay going to the future. But I would not be surprised if they miss out. As like you said, there's been too many injuries, and it's just a weird put together on the road, like in the lineup. Like the entire roster is just put together extremely strange right now because they're not expecting to compete. I don't believe at least.
They have a lot of pretty good players. No like super great guys like that are like, oh my god, like superstar players. But they have a lot of guys that contribute, and I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of snuck in. Moving on to Denver, this is a team that I think has been a pretty big disappointment. Obviously, the Paul Millsap injury was huge, but they just have been getting a lot of losses to non-playoff teams, and that's really kind of hurting their chances in the race.
Yeah, Denver to me, it's funny because like on one of those teams on a nightly basis, you can have a completely different thought about them. One week they'll have a couple nice wins. Jokic will record a triple double. Gary Harris might have a game where he goes off. Jamal Murray might go off for like 30 in one of those games, and you think, man, this Denver Nuggets team can really take off. And then the next game they play whoever the hell they play, and
Lakers.
Jamal Murray will have like 8 points, and then Jokic will have like 13, 5, and 4, and we're just like, all right, where was this team that we just saw the other night? The consistency has been the biggest issue for the Nuggets. I think they're a very talented team, but I think the youth for them is their biggest issue. There's just not enough guys consistently putting together, good performances or doing good performances at the same time as other guys in the roster.
Yeah, and I know the Nuggets fans have complained a lot about Mike Malone and also, not having Millsap and him being a defensive type of guy and the defense being so bad at times. Obviously, he's come back, but he's not 100% yet and hasn't been there all year to build up that mentality and that culture. I think it's a real issue for them. But like you said, talent-wise, they still have the ability to put together a run and probably get back in the playoff picture. But right now, your confidence can't be high on them because they just can't handle business against bad teams.
They kind of remind me of the Pacers from last year when they
Yeah,
had like a very star-struck roster. Well, not star-struck, but they had a ton of good
ton of
talented
talent.
players, and they just couldn't get any consistency. It'd be from a week-to-week basis where we'd see really good performance from everybody, and then next week we're saying, all right, well, where was this team from last week, and why are we struggling this week?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and like we said, all the stuff we just said on this playoff race thing, it could change in a week or two. Just guys are going to play better, play worse. Kind of can get that. This is the time when you see those streaks that really matter come playoff time when the guys you don't want to see somebody slumping right now. This is a time where you want to see somebody kind of get in the stride and get their confidence high. But that wraps it up for today. Corey, as always, thank you for hopping on. Thank everybody for listening. You can always check out the outlet on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and like I mentioned, now airing on Dash Radio. And be sure to give us some feedback on OTG's Twitter at OTG Basketball.